Now, here's the next step. Once you have that data in hand, the next thing you have to do is you actually, as a management team, you have to extend an invitation to people. You actually have to let them, you have to take that information, and by the way, if you really want to drive engagement, one of the other things you can look at is transparency. When an employee survey is given, we believe that the results of that survey ought to be shared with the employees that took the survey concurrently with leadership seeing it. Because what does that actually, what do you think that very act, just sharing information simultaneously, what does that create or lead or build? It's trust. It builds trust and credibility. How many of you have ever taken a survey before and months went by before you heard anything? How many of you were into the next round of surveys before the first survey was ever reported back to you? Anybody? So one of the things we really believe is that you have to take that survey, you share the results with everybody right up front, and then as a management team, you have to roll up your sleeves and make a long-term commitment to address those points of leverage. And I'll go back, and this is not rocket science, this is the same diagram I showed you before. You'll notice that in this particular instance, while feeling valued was the primary driver, there were two secondary drivers that actually drove that. And that's what you want to do with the survey. You want to go back, and you may have secondary drivers for specific hospitals within the system, for specific departments even. But what you want to do is go back and find those variables that are statistically correlated for that group and go back and attack those. At the end of the day, those metrics that you look at, if they're not actionable, if you can't do anything with them, then you really shouldn't be doing a survey to begin with. Okay? So what are some of the typical, again, I can't speak for this organization specifically right now because you haven't surveyed in a while, but here are a couple things that we know historically tend to drive what I would call our engagement levers. A clear communication strategy pertaining to organizational purpose, mission, and values. I would imagine you're doing pretty good at that. How do you think you do with this one? Above average expectation and performance feedback systems. As a leader, ask yourself, how well am I communicating to the people who report to me just how well they're doing? It should never be a question in anybody's mind whether they're doing what's expected and whether it's contributing to the overall value of the business. Well-developed employee recognition process. Does employee recognition have to cost a lot of money? No. It can be something as simple as a $15 gift certificate or a movie certificate. We actually have, and by the way, should recognition only come from managers and leaders? No. Does the hospital have a peer-to-peer recognition program right now? We actually had the organization that I mentioned before, Allied Signal, that I was a part of. They had what I thought was a novel idea. It was called Caught in the Act of Doing Something Right. And any employee in the organization could recognize any other employee in the organization who went over and above what was typically expected of them. And all they did was they went down, they filled out a little half a page application, gave it to the Human Resources Department, and that employee then would receive like a $15 gift certificate to Bennigan's or something. But it was a way of making recognition an organizational experience, not just a leadership experience. Coaching and mentoring. Okay? By the way, coaching is great, and coaching typically involves outside resources brought into the organization. Has anybody in here ever had what you would consider to be a mentor in the organization? What is a mentor? Thank you for raising your hand. What does a mentor actually provide you? A one-to-one relationship, right? What is the value, though? What do I get as the mentee, the person who has someone up above me? And typically a mentor is not from my own department. It's not my boss or supervisor. But what does a mentor provide to me as someone who's trying to move up the ranks in the organization? Guidance, feedback, someone to objectively share experiences, and maybe even advocacy a little bit, right? So I would absolutely recommend that if you're not doing that right now, for your high performers, for your high pos, your high potentials, get them involved. Now, mentoring being a mentor actually takes quite a bit of it takes a little bit of dedication and commitment itself, because it does take time. But I think what you'll find is if you really want to get your hooks into your high performers, mentoring is a tremendous way to do that. Attention to diversity and respect agendas. I mentioned this earlier, but again, what I would do is I would focus not on diversity per se, but focus on initiatives that help you create this thing called respect for everyone in the organization. And then finally, I'll talk about this more, a strong commitment to education and learning for all associates and managers. Now, this is a segue to the final step of the engagement process.